High above the streets of modern Athens stands one of the most iconic monuments of the ancient world. Built more than 2 millennia ago, it draws millions of visitors from around the globe each year. It was crafted by a civilization whose legacy stretched from the Roman Empire to the very foundations of modern democracies. Its columns echoed in the heart of Washington, D.C. But ancient Greece was more than marble and myth. It was a place of fierce rivalries and radical ideas, where philosophy, science, and art collided. In this episode, we explore the story of ancient Greece, its rise, its decline, and the forces that ultimately reshaped our world. The year is 3000 BCE, thousands of years before the Greeks would raise the Parthenon above Athens. Writing had already emerged in Sumer, in what is now Iraq, marking the dawn of recorded history. In Egypt, the first steps toward the Old Kingdom were underway, centuries before a single pyramid touched the sky. Across the world, civilizations like the Caral Supe in South America and the Indus Valley civilization in South Asia were laying the foundations of complex society. And in the land that would one day be called Greece, early inhabitants lived off the rugged landscape, though the first Proto-Greek speakers were still roughly 1,000 years from arriving. Mainland Greece was wild and uneven, nearly 80% covered by mountains, dividing the region into isolated valleys and coastal plains. The tallest peak, Mount Olympus, loomed like a throne above the land, destined to be the mythical seat of the gods. Fertile farmland was scarce, scattered in narrow bands across the rivers and basins. But Greece's true gift was the sea. With thousands of miles of coastline and over 1,000 islands dotting the Aegean and Ionian seas, the Greeks would one day become master seafarers. But it wasn't just the reach of the sea that shaped them. It was the world they saw around them. These islands offered a mix of rocky cliffs and bays, landscapes that were both practical and striking. Clear waters and steady winds made sea travel possible, while the scenery, from bright coves to sun-bleached hillsides, left a lasting impression. For the ancient Greeks, this wasn't just scenery, it was a source of imagination. The land and sea inspired myths, art, and a curiosity about the wider world, even as the terrain itself created natural divisions. While this broken, jagged geography discouraged unification, it encouraged something else: local identity, competition, and independence. The land was fractured. But from that fragmentation, some of the greatest stories in ancient history would unfold. Long before cities or temples, Paleolithic and Mesolithic peoples hunted, fished, and gathered throughout the lands of Greece. In places like Frank Cave, humans lived continuously for more than 30,000 years. Here, generations witnessed the end of the Ice Age, the rise of farming, and the first use of obsidian, imported from the distant island of Milos. Among these islands, mariners, traders, and craftsmen carved elegant marble figurines and sailed the Aegean in boats. Their smooth, abstract forms remain some of the most recognizable artifacts of the ancient Aegean, displayed in museums around the world today. Over time, these societies across both the land and the sea continued to evolve in complexity, setting the stage for the first great civilization of the region. The southernmost and largest of the Greek islands is Crete, where what many consider Europe's first civilization took root. The Minoans. Named after the legendary King Minos, the Minoans were not Greek, though their story is forever intertwined with the world of ancient Greece. They were a seafaring people who built complex societies centered around palace hubs, most famously Knossos. These places were decorated with vivid frescoes, scenes of nature, ritual, and myth. Among them, the bull-leaping fresco stands out, a dramatic image of an acrobat soaring over a charging bull, perhaps a rite of passage or a sacred spectacle. Minoan art was held in such high esteem that examples, or clear influences, have been found in places as distant as Egypt. Whether through trade, traveling artisans, or imitation, it's evident that their visual style was valued by foreign elites. While modern historians stop short of calling Minoan society matriarchal, their art consistently places women in prominent, even central roles. Priestesses, figures of authority, and symbols of divinity. Notably absent are depictions of kings, which sets them apart from neighboring civilizations. Architecturally, the Neo-Palatial period, beginning in around 1700 BCE, marked a flourishing of design. Multi-story complexes, advanced plumbing systems, and sprawling courtyards suggest a society with both technical skill and ceremonial focus. Some palace sites appear less like royal residences and more like administrative or ritual centers, blurring the lines between governance and religion. In time, the palaces decayed, but their remains would speak to later generations. Centuries later, the shattered ruins left behind on Crete would ignite the Greek imagination. Among the remnants, horned altars, bull frescoes, and winding palace corridors, Greeks crafted a story to make sense of what they saw. They told of King Minos, who ruled from a great palace at Knossos, of Daedalus, the master craftsman who built a labyrinth so complex no one who entered could find their way out, and of the Minotaur, a monstrous creature, half man, half bull, imprisoned in the maze and fed human tribute. To end this horror, Athens sent a prince, Theseus. With the help of Minos' daughter Ariadne and a simple spool of thread, he braved the twisting halls, slayed the beast, and escaped into the darkness. It was a myth, but one that rose from the ruins of a forgotten world. The Minoans wrote in a script known as Linear A, a language that, to this day, remains undeciphered. Their words are lost to time. But their legacy is carved into the stones of their palaces and painted into the walls of their sanctuaries. For centuries, they dominated the seas and spread their influence across the Aegean. Until, from far away, a new people emerged. The year is 1450 BCE. Centuries earlier, the first Proto-Greek-speaking peoples had finally crossed into the region, bringing with them a new language and a warrior ethos. From this foundation emerged the Mycenaeans, a civilization named after one of its greatest strongholds, Mycenae. The Mycenaeans were a militarized society. At the top stood the king and war leader, who ruled from massive fortified palaces like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. The walls of these palaces were so colossal that later Greeks believed they could only have been built by giants. These citadels weren't just defensive strongholds, they were administrative and religious hubs, filled with storerooms, shrines, and throne rooms. They governed not only the Greek mainland, but extended their reach across the Aegean Sea, establishing outposts and trade networks that rivaled those of the Minoans. And then, the shift took place, and the Minoans fell into gradual decline. The great Minoan palaces on Crete, once dominant, were destroyed or abandoned. Theories abound: volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or foreign invasion. But many scholars believe the Mycenaeans played a direct role, either through conquest or opportunistic expansion. Whatever the cause, the Minoan era faded, and the Mycenaeans stepped into the vacuum. They adopted aspects of Minoan culture, its art, religious symbols, and architectural styles, but gave it a more martial edge. They were builders of tombs and takers of spoils, leaving behind shaft graves filled with gold, weapons, and ceremonial masks. Mycenaean graves, particularly the early shaft graves, were deep vertical burial pits lined with stone, where elite individuals were buried alongside a wealth of these goods, meant to display status and accompany the dead into the afterlife. One of the most iconic finds from this era is the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, unearthed in a royal grave at Mycenae. Though it likely predates the legendary Trojan War, it remains one of the most famous artifacts of the Bronze Age. A golden face staring out across millennia. As Mycenaean society grew in power and complexity, so too did their tombs. Later generations constructed tholos, or beehive tombs, monumental circular chambers built into hillsides, reached by long stone passageways. These were feats of engineering that reflected rising political authority and centralized planning. Perhaps the most impressive example is the treasury of Atreus, built around 1250 BCE. Despite its name, it was not a treasury, but a royal tomb, engineered with astonishing precision. Its massive stone weighs over 100 tons, and for more than 1,000 years, its soaring dome remained the largest in the world. It stands to this day as a testament to Mycenaean ambition and architectural skill. That same ambition is evident elsewhere, at Glar, a massive fortified citadel that rose on the edge of Lake Copaeus in ancient Greece. The lake had long posed a problem, a vast marshy basin prone to flooding, swallowing arable land that could have fed thousands. To reclaim it, the Mycenaeans dug canals and carved a network of underground drainage tunnels into the surrounding limestone. The effort partially drained the lake, transforming large areas of the basin into fertile farmland. Glar stood watch over this new agricultural heartland, its stone walls enclosing more space than even Mycenae itself. The project turned a once unusable wetland into a thriving plain, likely supporting both the local population and the palace economy through increased food production. Unlike the Minoans, whose Linear A script remains a mystery, the Mycenaeans wrote in Linear B, a script that early Greek speakers used for record-keeping. These clay tablets, baked accidentally in fires that destroyed the palaces, preserved lists of goods, names, and rituals. Evidence not just of mythic kings and battles, but of a deeply organized society. The Mycenaeans would dominate the Greek world for centuries, and in time, their memory would evolve into legend. Figures like Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Odysseus are immortalized in epic poetry. But their fall would be just as dramatic as their rise. Around 1200 BCE, a wave of destruction swept across the ancient Near East. Palaces burned, cities were abandoned, and entire civilizations crumbled. This period is known as the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious, far-reaching catastrophe that reshaped the ancient Near East. No single cause can fully explain the devastation. Theories range from climate change, earthquakes, and widespread famine, to internal revolts and foreign invasions. Among the most debated culprits are the Sea Peoples, a shadowy confederation of raiders who struck from the sea, leaving chaos in their wake. The effects were catastrophic. The Hittite Empire vanished from history. The Egyptians, though they survived, were battered and forced into retreat. Even the powerful Assyrians were pushed back. And in Greece, the Mycenaean civilization collapsed. The great palatial centers, Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, were destroyed or abandoned. Trade networks vanished, craftsmanship declined, populations dwindled. And with the collapse came the loss of writing. Linear B disappeared. For the next 4 centuries, Greece fell silent, at least in the written record. This era became known as the Greek Dark Ages, a term that has since been challenged. Because while monumental architecture and literacy vanished, life itself did not. Small communities endured. People adapted to a new reality, simpler, more localized, but still evolving. One of the clearest glimpses into this transitional age comes from the island of Euboea, at a site called Lefkandi. Here, archaeologists uncovered a monumental structure, far larger than anything else from the period, containing the remains of a warrior and the body of a woman, lavishly buried with gold jewellery and imported luxury goods. Lefkandi challenges the idea of total collapse. It suggests that even in an age without writing or palaces, some communities retained wealth, trade connections, and a clear social hierarchy. Beneath the surface of decline, continuity remained. Continuity that would help forge the next chapter of Greek civilization. The Greeks had preserved their past, not through stone inscriptions or written words, but through oral tradition. Tales of gods and monsters, warriors and kings, passed down by word of mouth across generations. And at the centre of this oral tradition were two epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These epics were performed from memory, recited in palaces, marketplaces, and at festivals. The Iliad is set during the final weeks of the decade-long Trojan War. It begins with Achilles' quarrel with Agamemnon over the capture of Briseis, which drives Achilles to withdraw from battle, tilting the balance toward the Trojans. As Hector and the Trojan forces press their advantage, Achilles' close friend, Patroclus, dons his armor and is slain by Hector, spurring Achilles to return in a fury of grief and vengeance. In a climactic duel, Achilles kills Hector and drags his body around the walls of Troy. And the poem ends with Priam's plea and Hector's honorable funeral, underscoring themes of heroism, mortality, and the gods' interference in human affairs. The Odyssey follows Odysseus, king of Ithaca, on his perilous 10-year journey home after Troy. Early on, he and his men raid the Cicones, but are swept off course by a storm. Odysseus then encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, whom he blinds to escape, provoking Poseidon's wrath. He survives the enchantments of Circe, who turns his crew into swine, and sails to the underworld to seek prophecy from the seer Tiresias. Between narrowly escaping the Sirens, navigating past Scylla and Charybdis, and spending 7 years with Calypso, Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca in disguise. There, he finds his palace overrun by suitors vying for his wife Penelope's hand. With Athena's help, he reveals himself, slaughters the suitors, and is reunited with Penelope, completing a tale of cunning, endurance, and the longing for home. These were more than tales of adventure. To the Greek people, they were foundations of identity, a mythic inheritance that bound the fractured city-states to a common ancestry of greatness, courage, and tragedy. Imagine sitting in the glow of firelight, listening to a bard perform the entire saga, each word weaving together memory and myth. The epics were attributed to a man named Homer, a figure shrouded in mystery. Some historians believe Homer was not a single person at all, but a collective voice, shaped and reshaped over time. Yet whether one poet or many, the stories endured. Eventually, the Greeks would rediscover writing, this time borrowing and adapting the Phoenician alphabet, creating a system that would evolve into the script we recognize today. It was through this written form that the Iliad and Odyssey were finally preserved. Another foundational voice emerged, Hesiod, a poet whose work would help define the religious and cosmic worldview of the Greek people. In his epic Theogony, Hesiod lays out the birth of the cosmos and the rise of the Greek gods. This was not a distant, untouchable pantheon. These were gods who quarreled, schemed, and loved. Zeus, the thunder-wielding king of the skies. Hera, the fierce queen and goddess of marriage. Athena, born from Zeus's head, goddess of wisdom and war. Apollo, the archer of light and prophecy. Hermes, the cunning messenger, thief, and guide of souls. And many others, gods of the sea, of the hunt, of wine, of chaos. These deities weren't just worshipped, they were mirrors of the human experience. They explained the natural world, justified power, and offered moral lessons, however messy those lessons might be, all of which were shared among the Greek peoples. One of the most revered examples of this shared devotion was Delphi, where pilgrims across Greece came to seek the will of the gods. Perched high on Mount Parnassus, Delphi stood proudly. Travelers of all kinds, farmers seeking a good harvest, generals praying for victory, even poets and playwrights asking for inspiration, made the long, winding journey to its sacred precinct. At the heart of Delphi sat the temple of Apollo, where the Pythia, Apollo's priestess, delivered cryptic prophecies that could sway kings and armies. The Pythia delivered her oracles from deep within the temple. She would descend into its inner chamber, the Aditon, and take her seat atop a tripod placed above a natural fissure in the earth. Ancient accounts describe her inhaling strange vapors that induced a trance-like state. The Pythia would speak in a disjointed, frenzied manner, her voice distorted by emotion or trance. Nearby priests interpreted her words, shaping them into cryptic verses delivered to the petitioners. Another ritual would begin to take shape, one that blended religion, identity, and rivalry. The Olympic Games, held in honor of Zeus, brought together athletes from across the Greek world to compete in feats of strength, speed, and endurance. The first games have been traditionally dated to 776 BCE. During the games, temporary truces were called, ensuring safe passage for participants to and from Olympia. The festival began with a solemn oath-taking ceremony, where athletes swore before Zeus to compete honorably. The second day featured events like chariot and horse races at the Hippodrome, a test of both rider and animal. Day 3 was dedicated to Zeus himself, marked by grand sacrifices. The fourth day brought contests of strength and combat, wrestling, boxing, and a brutal blend of both, though eye gouging and strikes to the groin were forbidden. The most prestigious event was the Stadion, a short foot race of just over 192 meters. Towering above it all stood the colossal statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, reminding all who entered of the divine presence watching over the games and its competitors. Language, epics, gods, games. These were the pillars of shared Greek identity. In a land divided by mountains and seas, these common threads connected a culture that stretched across the Aegean. But these threads would not be enough to unite the Greek people under a single banner. The archaic age of ancient Greece, as historians term it, had begun in 800 BCE. Along with the proliferation of writing, games, and religious traditions, a new pattern had also begun to emerge on the Greek mainland: the polis. In Greek, polis means city, but it meant far more than just a collection of buildings. A polis was an independent city-state, self-governing, self-sufficient, and fiercely proud. The polis became the foundation of Greek political, cultural, and spiritual life. Each polis included more than just its urban center. It encompassed the surrounding farmland, where farmers tirelessly worked the fields. There was also the agora, a central square that served as a marketplace, gathering place, and civic hub. Here, under the morning sun, vendors laid out amphorae of olive oil, fresh figs, and locally caught fish. A blacksmith crafted items at one corner, while fishermen mended nets at another. Above it all stood the Acropolis, the high city, a fortified hill, often crowned with marble temples and small shrines dedicated to the city's patron gods. The summit served as both a place of ritual and, if needed, a last refuge in times of war. To be Greek was to belong not to a nation, but to a polis. Each city had its own government, laws, army, and currency, its own customs, festivals, and founding myths. Loyalty to one's polis was absolute, and identity was not tied to Greece as a whole, but to Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, or any of the hundreds of individual Greek city-states, such as Argos, Syracuse, Rhodes, Thessaly. Daily life was shaped by this civic bond. A daily life that, for many, was harsh and unforgiving. Despite popular images of ancient Greeks draped in white robes and debating philosophy, this was far from the reality for most. Like much of the ancient world, everyday life in Greece was shaped not by scholarly pursuits, but by the demands of survival. The vast majority were farmers who lived in simple mud brick homes, surrounding courtyards or gardens with dirt floors and no plumbing. Cooking was done over open flames, and diets were modest: bread, olives, cheese, and the occasional fish. Meat was rare, usually reserved for the wealthy and religious festivals. Farming itself was no easy task. Without large-scale irrigation systems, Greek farmers relied heavily on seasonal rainfall, offering prayers to the gods for favorable weather. Oxen, if available, pulled wooden ploughs through the soil, and seeds were sown by hand. In spring, the grain was harvested with curved sickles, then bundled and brought to threshing floors, where animals trampled it to separate the kernels from the husks. The grain was then winnowed, filtered, and stored in communal or household granaries. Women were largely confined to managing the household, raising children, and overseeing slaves, with no formal political or legal rights, and only limited public presence. Life in the cities, by contrast, could be more refined for the elite. Urban homes often centered around a private courtyard that doubled as a family space and site for household altars. Surrounding rooms served for sleeping, storage, cooking, and occasionally entertaining. One such setting was the symposium, an all-male gathering where participants reclined on couches, drank wine, recited poetry, and debated politics or philosophy. Wine was central to Greek life, but it was never drunk undiluted. Due to the absurdly high alcohol content in ancient wine, it was usually mixed with water to ensure safe and civil consumption. The process began in the vineyards. Grapes were picked and dried by the sun. Once gathered, they were stomped to release their juice, which was then fermented, filtered, and stored in large jars before being shipped across the Mediterranean in clay amphorae. Olive oil was just as essential. Olives were hand-picked, crushed in stone presses, and pressed again to release their rich oil, used in cooking, lighting, athletics, and religious ceremonies. For most, there was little time for leisure. And yet, through this hard, ordinary life, they built the foundations of something special. As time went on, populations grew. And because of the scarce arable land, thousands of Greeks set sail in search of new opportunities. It was then that a remarkable wave of Greek colonization swept across the Mediterranean world. From the coasts of Spain to the shores of the Black Sea, from southern France to North Africa, Greek colonies took root. Each colony was independent, but retained deep cultural ties to its mother city. On the Greek mainland, amidst the hundreds of independent polis, a few rose above the rest, known across the Aegean for their power, culture, or fearsome reputation. Corinth sat at a strategic crossroads, positioned on the narrow isthmus that connected northern and southern Greece. It was a gateway between two seas, the Aegean to the east and the Ionian to the west. This made Corinth a hub of trade, wealth, and innovation. As the 8th century BCE came to a close, Corinth was growing. Its markets overflowed with goods from across the Mediterranean. But Corinth wasn't just about trade. It was also a cultural force, home to some of the earliest stone temples in Greece, and a place where art, architecture, and engineering flourished. Looming high above the city was its fortified acropolis, the Acro-Corinth, rising over 1,800 feet, 575 meters above the surrounding plain. At its summit stood the Temple of Aphrodite, goddess of love, where myth and worship intertwined. The sanctuary was said to be served by sacred attendants and attracted pilgrims from across the Greek world. The Diolkos, a paved trackway across the isthmus, allowed ships to be hauled over land, bypassing a long and dangerous sail around the Peloponnese. Politically, Corinth was an early adopter of tyranny, not in the modern sense of oppression, but as a system where a single powerful ruler seized control, often with popular support. This model would spread across the Greek world, challenging aristocracies and planting the seeds of future political experimentation. Another polis, Thebes, sat in the fertile plains of Boeotia, nestled between the foothills of Mount Cithaeron and the Cephissus River. By the 8th century BCE, Thebes had grown into Boeotia's leading city, forging alliances with nearby towns and asserting influence across the surrounding countryside. Thebes' economy revolved around rich farmland. Olive groves, vineyards, and barley fields fed both its own population and those of smaller Boeotian villages. Religious life centered on sanctuaries, such as Apollo Ismenias' temple on the Cadmea, and local shrines to Dionysus, whose rites fed the early theatrical traditions. Within this social fabric, close male bonds displayed a distinctive role. Thebes would famously organize the sacred band in the 4th century BCE, supposedly an elite corps of 150 pairs of male lovers, on the belief that such intimate ties would foster courage and mutual loyalty on the battlefield. More broadly, across Greece, same-sex relationships, especially the horrific practice of adult men with adolescent boys, were socially acknowledged as part of education, mentorship, and civic life. At the same time, formal institutions like the sacred band would be uniquely Theban. Elsewhere, another polis would establish itself as one of the most dominant Greek city-states. The city-state of Sparta. Tucked into the fertile valley of the Eurotas River, surrounded by mountains on nearly all sides, Sparta was geographically protected and socially isolated. Its origins trace back to the unification of merely a few villages in the 9th century BCE, forming a single polis under a rigid code of discipline and unity. In the 7th century BCE, the semi-legendary lawgiver Lycurgus is said to have codified his ethos into the Great Retra, a set of oral decrees that reorganized land into equal plots, introduced the agoge, and established communal banquets, the syssitia, to reinforce solidarity among citizens. Sparta's rise came not through trade or diplomacy. It came through conquest. Early in its history, Sparta expanded into neighboring Messenia, subjugating its population and creating a permanent underclass of helots, serfs, who farmed the land and sustained the Spartan state. Some accounts would describe a secret Spartan force, the Cryptia, which patrolled the countryside, murdering helots in an effort to quell rebellion and terrify the rest. In this effort to maintain control over the majority population, Spartans transformed their society into a militarized machine. At its core was the belief that the state came before the individual, and that only the strongest could survive. By age 7, boys eligible for citizenship entered the agoge, a brutal state-run training program that forged physical strength and unwavering obedience. They endured harsh discipline, wore minimal clothing, and were even encouraged to steal, so long as they weren't caught, to sharpen their cunning and survival skills for the battlefield. As the boy grew into adulthood, he became a citizen warrior, a Spartiate, belonging to an exclusive class that made up only a small minority of Sparta's population. But Spartan society wasn't only about warriors. Spartan women held a unique place in Greek society, educated, outspoken, and given unusual autonomy compared to their counterparts elsewhere. Because men were often away at training or at war, women managed estates and households, and were expected to be just as tough and proud as their sons. Outside of the Helots and the Spartiates, there was a third class, the Perioikoi, those who dwell around. These were free, non-citizen inhabitants who lived in the towns and villages surrounding Sparta. They were not slaves, but neither did they enjoy full political rights. Instead, they formed the backbone of Sparta's economy, working as craftsmen, traders, and farmers. The Perioikoi also served in the military and could rise to respected positions in wartime. But they remained excluded from the rigid citizenship and political structure that defined Spartan life. Sparta was an oligarchy, ruled by a dual kingship, balanced by a council of elders and an assembly. The ephors were 5 annually elected officials who held powerful oversight in Sparta. They could summon assemblies, oversee education, and even put kings on trial, serving as a check on royal authority. It was conservative by design, resistant to change, suspicious of outsiders, and focused on preserving its rigid way of life. While their soon-to-be-named foil became a symbol of culture and intellect, Sparta stood for order, strength, and tradition. It was feared and admired across the Greek world, not for its art or architecture, but for its unbreakable will. For much of its existence, Sparta had no defensive walls, likely thanks to its natural surroundings. But when asked, according to legend, the Spartans famously replied, "Our walls are men." If Sparta was a fortress, Athens was a flame. Where Sparta valued obedience and tradition, Athens thrived on argument, ambition, and change. The contrast between the two wasn't just in culture, it was in worldview. One looked inward to preserve. The other reached outward to explore, question, and transform. Athens began humbly. Its early kings ruled from the rocky heights of the Acropolis. But by the 7th century BCE, power had slipped into the hands of a narrow aristocracy. Wealth concentrated around a few families, while most citizens went poor. This marked the beginning of Athens' slow path toward its most enduring legacy: democracy. In most ancient civilizations, power was held by monarchs, priest-kings, or rigid aristocracies. Political authority was seen as the right of the elite, passed down by birth or divine favor. Ordinary people had little voice, and laws were often unwritten, administered at the whim of those in charge. What would eventually emerge in Athens was something radically different. But it didn't happen overnight. Around 621 BCE, the lawgiver Draco was appointed to codify the law. His code imposed harsh penalties for crimes, even minor ones. Homicide, theft, and many offences were punished by death, including the stealing of a head of cabbage. Draco's laws did little to relieve the broader crisis of inequality. Then came the Athenian statesman Solon, who cancelled debts and freed those enslaved for debt. He balanced political representation by dividing citizens into 4 property classes. Not all classes could hold the highest offices, but all 4 could serve in the ecclesia, or assembly, and the boule, the council appointed to run daily affairs of the city. Solon's reforms did not establish full democracy, but it began to lay the groundwork to a stable foundation. Finally, around 508 BCE, Cleisthenes turned Athens in a new direction. He dismantled old family-based factions, reorganized citizens into 10 tribes, and increased the boule to 500 members, 50 from each tribe. The council's agenda-setting role grew, and an expanding body of magistrates and officials were chosen by lot or election, ensuring that ordinary free men from every region of Attica could participate. By the late 6th century BCE, Athens had become something unprecedented. A polis where power rested not in a single ruler or a narrow elite, but in the collective will of its free citizens. This system was imperfect. Women, slaves, and metics, resident foreigners representing most of the population, were excluded. But it still marked a radical shift. On any given morning, citizens might climb the Pnyx Hill to attend the ecclesia, the assembly, where they voted on matters of war, foreign alliances, and public spending. Proposals were put forward, sometimes by elites, sometimes by farmers or tradesmen, and debated openly. The boule, or Council of 500, met almost every day to set the agenda, oversee magistrates, and manage city affairs. Juries of hundreds, drawn by lottery, gathered in massive law courts to deliver verdicts on legal disputes. It was messy, loud, and often inefficient, but it was participation. Government by the governed. It was a turning point in human history, a moment when a city dared to place its destiny in the hands of its people, an idea that would inspire nations to this very day. But at the same time, across the Aegean Sea, a storm was brewing. In Ionia, along the western coast of modern-day Turkey, Greek colonies lived under the rule of the vast Achaemenid Empire. The Persians. Ruled by King Darius I, the Persians tolerated many cultures and religions. Far from the barbaric caricature later painted by Greek writers, Persia was among the most advanced and organized empires of the ancient world. Under King Darius I, it stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, linked by the Royal Road, a network of highways that carried couriers and goods across thousands of miles in mere days. The Persians pioneered efficient systems of taxation, administration, and coinage. Darius's rule was not one of blind conquest, but of pragmatic tolerance. Each satrapy or province was often allowed to keep its own local laws, customs, and priests. Beyond rebuilding temples, Darius sent envoys to consult religious leaders and even subsidized festivals, binding Egyptians, Babylonians, and Ionian Greeks alike into a single empire without erasing their identities. But such tolerance came with a price. In return, Persia demanded loyalty and tribute, an offering of earth and water. In 499 BCE, various Greek Ionian cities revolted. They were joined by Athens and Eretria, who sent ships and soldiers in solidarity. Together they marched inland and burned the Persian regional capital of Sardis. It was a symbolic victory, but it came at a cost. Darius was furious. He crushed the Ionian revolt within 5 years. But he never forgot the Athenian role in the uprising. He vowed revenge. And it was said that Darius commanded a servant to repeat an ominous reminder when he sat down to dine at night. Master, remember the Athenians. To meet the coming threat, Greek city-states relied on a citizen infantry known as hoplites. These men were not professional soldiers in the modern sense, but free citizens, farmers, artisans, merchants, who provided their own equipment, a heavy bronze helmet and breastplate, greaves to protect the shins, and a large round shield. Their primary weapon was a long spear, supported by a short sword carried at the hip. In battle, hoplites formed a phalanx, rows of men standing shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, creating a solid wall. Each hoplite's shield covered not only himself, but also partially covered his neighbor, demanding strict discipline and mutual trust. Training for a hoplite was part of civic duty, with drilling in formation and coordinated movements seen as essential for survival. In 490 BCE, Persian ships finally darkened the horizon. Darius had launched a punitive and very successful expedition across the Aegean, landing eventually at Marathon, roughly 26 miles outside of Athens. The Athenians called upon Sparta for aid, but Sparta delayed sending troops. Only the small city-state of Plataea would come to assist. Command fell to Miltiades, an experienced general with a complex past. Once a tyrant in the Thracian Chersonese, but now he was an exile turned Athenian, and saw in this battle a chance to redeem himself. He urged the Athenians to meet the Persians at Marathon, gambling that swift, decisive action could overcome Persian numbers. The Athenians assembled their hoplites and marched. For days, the two armies faced one another across the plain of Marathon, neither willing to commit, until at last the silence shattered and the battle erupted. The heavily armored Greek hoplites advanced in tight phalanx formation, shields locked and spears poised. The Persian lines, though vast, were lighter armed and less prepared for the shock of close combat. On the wings, the Greeks encircled the enemy, collapsing inward as the center held firm. Amid the chaos, the Persian forces broke. In the final moments, many were cut down as they fled toward their ships. Victory belonged to the Athenians. It was a stunning victory. According to later Athenian tradition, a messenger, often named Phidippides, ran approximately 26 miles from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory, collapsing and dying upon delivering the news. This tale inspired the modern marathon race and cemented Marathon's place in cultural memory. The victory at Marathon, while not a devastating one for the Persian Empire, represented something profound for the Greeks, a symbol that the Persians could be beaten in battle. But Persia would not stay defeated. And in Athens, a prominent politician and general named Themistocles knew it. Under his direction, Athens would begin assembling a massive navy, a fleet of ships called triremes, thanks to newly discovered silver mines at Laurion. Themistocles knew Athens was in a race against time, suspecting that one day the Persians would return. By 480 BCE, a new king, Xerxes I, son of Darius, assembled one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. An army with one goal in mind: the complete subjugation of the Greek city-states. Perhaps over 100,000 soldiers began marching across bridges built over the Hellespont, along with a massive fleet of ships. In the wake of this news, Greece stood divided. Some cities even surrendered. Others prepared to fight, ushering in a rare moment where the city-states of ancient Greece united for a common cause. This Greek alliance knew they would have to make a stand somewhere. After much debate, they chose to hold at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass framed by steep mountains on one side and the sea on the other, where enemy numbers counted for less. King Leonidas of Sparta led the defense, and for 2 days they repelled wave after wave of Persian attacks, relying on the choke point to negate the invaders' greater numbers. On the 3rd day, however, a local guide revealed a hidden path that allowed Persian forces to outflank the defenders. Leonidas was said to have dismissed most of the Greek allies, remaining behind with a smaller force to fight to the death. Their stand was a valiant effort, inspiring the legendary tale of the Spartan 300. But the battle was nonetheless a resounding strategic victory for the Persians. Meanwhile, Athens was forced to make a bold and painful decision. They evacuated the city, sending women and children to safety at the island of Salamis, while preparing to take the fight to the sea. Xerxes would go on to destroy Athens and its Acropolis, razing the original Parthenon that came before the one that now stands today. This would set up a decisive battle. The Persians, by this time, were seeking a fatal blow that would force the Greek allies into surrendering. The Greeks, on the other hand, saw an opportunity to turn the tide and avoid total conquest. At Salamis, Themistocles was said to have played a sophisticated ruse. He sent a false message to Xerxes, suggesting that the Greeks were on the verge of disbanding, and that only by blocking the straits could the Persians secure victory. Whether this ruse actually happened or not, Xerxes ordered his fleet into the cramped waters between the island and the Attic coast regardless. Once inside the straits, the Persians' numerical superiority became a liability, as their larger, less maneuverable vessels struggled in the confined channels, while the Greeks capitalized. Greek triremes, fast and agile warships, rammed and sank Persian ships in coordinated attacks, often breaking through enemy lines before the Persians could regroup. In the close quarters fighting, the allied Greeks devastated the Persian navy. With Xerxes' supply lines threatened, and fearing an allied strike on the pontoon bridges at the Hellespont, Xerxes withdrew the bulk of his army back to Asia and left his commander Mardonius to finish the campaign. This decisive victory not only blunted the Persian invasion, but also marked a turning point that galvanized Greek resistance for the remainder of the war. The next year, in 479 BCE, the remaining Persian forces were defeated again. Despite the destruction and heavy losses, the Greeks had finally won and drove the Persians out of their homeland. A patchwork of city-states, divided by politics and geography, had come together to defy one of the greatest empires in history. The Persian Wars did more than preserve Greek independence. They reshaped the Greek world, ushering in an era of confidence, expansion, and cultural flourishing. But victory had its price. Athens had led the charge, but now it sought to lead more than just itself. And soon, the greatest threats to Greece would not come from across the sea, but from within. With the Persian threat behind them, Athens emerged transformed during what's called the classical age of ancient Greece. What had once been one of many city-states was now the undisputed leader of a new Greek world. Victory had given the Athenians more than survival. It gave them confidence, ambition, and a sense of destiny. With a powerful navy, bustling ports, and access to tribute and trade, wealth flowed into the city like never before. Under the leadership of the powerful statesman Pericles, elected repeatedly as strategos or military general, Athens embarked on an ambitious building and cultural program. Pericles' vision and political skill ensured that resources were directed toward projects that would not only honor the gods, but also cement Athens' prestige. And with that wealth, they built. High above the city, the Acropolis was reborn. Not as a fortress, but as a monument to triumph, culture, and the gods. Approaching the Acropolis in the 5th century BCE, you'd follow the sacred way up the slope, passing shrines and statues until you reached the Propylaea, a grand marble gateway that marked the entrance to the sacred plateau. To your right, on a small outcrop, stood the temple of Athena Nike. Straight ahead, the Parthenon dominated the hilltop. More than a temple, it was a statement. It honored the goddess Athena, but also projected the city's ideals, order, harmony, and ambition. Its design followed precise mathematical ratios, giving it a sense of perfect symmetry, even though almost every line was subtly curved to correct for optical illusions. The columns leaned slightly inward. The floor arched upward at the center. Nothing was truly flat or straight, yet the result appeared flawless to the eye. Inside stood a towering gold and ivory statue of Athena, created by the sculptor Phidias, while the outer friezes and pediments depicted mythic scenes meant to reflect Athenian values. Built entirely of marble, assembled without mortar, and completed in under 15 years, the Parthenon was both a technical feat and a cultural symbol. Just beyond it stood the Erechtheion, an asymmetrical temple housing older sacred sites. It honored both Athena and Poseidon, and its south porch was unlike anything else in Greece. From the summit, the city spread out below. Descending the slopes, you'd pass the theatre of Dionysus, where Athenians gathered for performances of tragedy and comedy. At the base of the Acropolis, within the Agora, the temple of Hephaestus looked down from the western edge, one of the world's best preserved ancient temples to this day. Athens would go on to create some of the most memorable contributions to Greek culture. But there was a long lineage before. A slow unfolding of ideas, forms, and expressions that began centuries earlier. By the Archaic period, Greek sculpture had taken a step forward. Stiff, forward-facing statues, idealized figures of youths and maidens, stood as grave markers, offerings, and symbols of human perfection. On pottery, black figure and later red figure techniques allowed artists to depict scenes of mythology, ancient life, and athletic competition with dynamic realism. From cups to amphorae, these vessels told stories just as vivid as the epics. Lyric poetry also blossomed in the 7th century BCE. On the island of Lesbos, Sappho composed verses that explored personal desire, friendship, and the rituals of her circle. She and her contemporaries sang accompanied by the lyre, giving voice to the private lives of women and the intensity of human feeling, even as epic narratives continued to dominate the public sphere. By the 5th century BCE, drama had become a central part of Athenian religious festivals for Dionysus. Thespis was the first to leave the chorus and play a character, and Aeschylus soon added a second actor. Sophocles introduced a third actor and deeper character psychology in works like Oedipus Rex, while Euripides portrayed flawed heroes and sympathetic villains in plays such as Medea. Meanwhile, Aristophanes wrote biting comedies, The Clouds and Lysistrata, that satirized politics and society. More than mere entertainment, these plays gave Athenians public forums to examine justice, fate, and shared values. History, as we know it, owes much to the writer Herodotus. Born in Halicarnassus, he traveled widely and recorded what he saw and heard. His work, The Histories, explored the causes of the Persian Wars, but also included tales of distant lands, strange customs, and the rise and fall of empires. He mixed fact with folklore, but his goal was clear: to understand why events happened. In asking these questions, Herodotus became one of the earliest historians in human history. A generation later, Thucydides would go on to apply an even more rigorous eye to history, chronicling the Peloponnesian War. It was in this era, too, that some of the most essential scientific minds appeared. Thales pioneered natural inquiry by seeking material explanations for the world. Pythagoras revealed mathematical relationships underlying music and geometry. Hippocrates transformed medicine with systematic clinical observation, ethical practice, and the idea that disease had natural causes. Democritus introduced atomism, theorizing that all matter consists of tiny, indivisible particles. Also by the 5th century BCE, philosophy had moved west, to Athens. There, a new class of thinkers emerged, the Sophists. They traveled from city to city, offering education in rhetoric, logic, and civic life, often for a fee. To them, skill in persuasion was power, and truth could be shaped by argument. They taught that virtue was not fixed, but relative, that what was considered right depended on circumstance and culture. But not everyone agreed. Socrates changed the course of human thought forever. He wrote nothing himself, but through the dialogues of his student Plato, we hear his voice, always asking, always challenging. What is justice? What is virtue? How should one live? Socrates wandered the streets of Athens, questioning politicians, craftsmen, and youths. He believed that wisdom began with recognizing one's own ignorance. To him, the examined life was the only life worth living. His method, asking pointed questions to expose contradictions, became known as the Socratic method, a tool still used in classrooms and courtrooms today. Socrates' relentless questioning eventually drew the ire of many powerful Athenians. In 399 BCE, he was brought to trial on charges of impiety, refusing to acknowledge the city's gods, and corrupting the youth by encouraging them to challenge authority. Found guilty by a narrow margin, he was sentenced to death. While confined in a prison cell, Socrates spent his final days conversing with friends, still probing ideas of justice and the soul, even as his execution loomed. On the appointed day, he calmly drank a cup of poison hemlock and fell into a deep sleep from which he never awoke. Plato, building on Socrates' legacy, used dialogue to explore questions about justice, truth, and reality. He believed that the world we see is only a shadow of something deeper, a higher reality made up of perfect, unchanging ideas he called forms. In the Republic, he imagined a society ruled not by wealth or birth, but by wisdom, where philosopher leaders would be trained to understand these deeper truths and guide the city with reason. To turn this vision into reality, Plato founded the Academy, a school where students studied everything from ethics and politics to geometry and astronomy. It became a model for higher learning that would influence education for centuries. Aristotle, a student of Plato, took a different path. Instead of searching for perfect ideals beyond the world, he focused on studying the world as it is. He believed that knowledge came from observation, and that by looking closely at nature, politics, and human behavior, we could begin to understand how things work. In biology, he studied and classified hundreds of animals, trying to find patterns in how they lived. In politics, he compared different governments and argued that no one system was best for every city. It depended on local needs and conditions. In ethics, he wrote about virtue not as a fixed rule, but as a balance, finding the right path between extremes. And in logic, he laid the groundwork for how arguments are built and tested, forming the basis for reasoning used even today. At his school, the Lyceum, students learned through hands-on observation, discussion, and daily walks with their teacher, a method that helped connect philosophy to real life. In the span of just a few centuries, the Greeks made an indelible mark on history, building and crafting works that inspire awe to this day. But beneath the marble and the philosophy, a storm was quietly building. After the Persian Wars, Athens had led the formation of the Delian League, a defense alliance meant to protect the Greek world from future invasions. Member city-states contributed ships, soldiers, or money, pooling resources for the common defense. But over time, Athens began to treat the League less like an alliance and more like an empire. Tributes once meant for war were diverted toward massive building projects, temples, statues, and monuments that reshaped the Athenian skyline. The Parthenon, though a masterpiece, was built with funds that many allies felt were not Athens's to spend. One by one, cities that tried to leave the League were forced back in, some by diplomacy, others by force. Athens had grown powerful, but also increasingly dominant and resented. Meanwhile, Sparta watched with growing unease. The stage was set, not for another war of liberation, but for a war between Greeks themselves. The Peloponnesian War. On one side stood Athens, naval power, cultural beacon, leader of the Delian League. On the other, Sparta, land-based superpower, guardian of tradition, head of the Peloponnesian League. What began as simmering tension over power and influence erupted into open war in 431 BCE, though some fighting had broken out earlier. The first phase of the war was called the Archidamian War, named after Sparta's king Archidamus II. Sparta invaded Athenian territory by land, burning crops and villages. But Athens, under the leadership of Pericles, refused to fight on Sparta's terms. Instead, the Athenians retreated behind their great city walls and relied on their navy to strike across the seas. The strategy was defensive, calculated, and dangerous. Then came an enemy no general could plan for: plague. Crammed within the walls, Athens became a breeding ground for disease. A deadly epidemic swept through the population, killing tens of thousands, including the great Pericles himself and his sons. Sick men, women, and children would experience a wide variety of symptoms, some of which include inflamed redness of the eyes, fever, coughing, vomiting, and convulsions. Dead Athenians were heaped atop one another, rotting away or thrown into mass graves. Upon witnessing the devastation from afar, the Spartans promptly returned home. In the end, Athens survived, but the cost was heavy. The Golden Age had started to dim. The war dragged on, shifting from land to sea, from open battle to political betrayal. In 425 BCE, an Athenian fleet under Demosthenes was blown off course and landed at Pylos, a rocky headland in the southwestern Peloponnese. Seeing the defensive potential of the site, Demosthenes fortified it, provoking a swift Spartan response. A force of Spartan soldiers landed on the nearby island of Sphacteria, hoping to blockade the Athenians and reclaim the area. But things didn't go as planned. The Athenians held firm at Pylos, and a surprise naval victory trapped the Spartan soldiers on Sphacteria without supplies. The situation became dire. Sparta, normally confident in its land-based supremacy, was now watching over 400 of its elite hoplites stranded on an island. Among them were men from some of the most prestigious Spartan families. Athens, sensing an opportunity, refused peace overtures. And when reinforcements arrived, Demosthenes launched a bold assault. In a stunning reversal of expectations, Athenian light troops harassed the Spartans in the rocky terrain, wearing them down before the final hoplite charge. The result was historic. Over 100 Spartans surrendered. Spartan warriors were trained to die rather than yield. Their surrender shocked the Greek world. For Athens, this was a moment of triumph. Not only had they captured prisoners who could be used as bargaining chips, but they had also shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. For the next several years, Athens had the upper hand. But the war was far from over. In 422 BCE, the tide turned again. The city of Amphipolis, a wealthy and strategically vital colony in Thrace, had fallen under Spartan control thanks to the efforts of the gifted Spartan general Brasidas. Determined to reclaim it, Athens sent an army led by Cleon, the same demagogue who had opposed peace talks after Pylos. The two forces clashed outside Amphipolis. Brasidas, though outnumbered, executed a bold surprise attack. Both he and Cleon were killed in the fighting, but the battle ended in a decisive Spartan victory. The loss of Amphipolis and the death of key leaders on both sides left Athens and Sparta exhausted and more open to negotiation. In 421 BCE, a treaty called the Peace of Nicias was struck, with the intention of fostering peace between the Spartans and Athenians for 50 years. It lasted for 6. During this uneasy truce, a new political force rose in Athens. Alcibiades. Brilliant, persuasive, and dangerously ambitious. A student of Socrates and member of a powerful aristocratic family, he captivated the public with bold speeches and sweeping visions for Athenian greatness. At a time when Athenian leaders could be ostracized, exiled by public vote to prevent any one man from gaining too much power, he walked a careful line, building alliances and undercutting rivals. He convinced the assembly to launch an enormous expedition to Sicily, claiming it would bring wealth and glory by defeating the city of Syracuse. The vote passed, and Athens sent its largest force ever overseas. But days after the fleet departed, he was accused of a scandal and recalled to stand trial. Instead of returning, he fled to Sparta, where he betrayed Athenian plans and advised the enemy. At Sicily, the Athenians would later struggle to breach Syracuse's fortifications and lost time in failed assaults. As supplies dwindled and disease spread in their camps. The Syracusans, bolstered by reinforcements from Peloponnesian allies, halted Athenian advances. By the summer of 413 BCE, Athens decided to withdraw. But Syracuse's forces controlled the harbour exit. As the Athenians packed their remaining triremes and transports, Syracusan ships and a Peloponnesian relief fleet blockaded the channel. In cramped waters, the Athenian ships were rammed and sunk amid chaotic fighting. Many crews who tried to escape by land were captured or killed when their path was cut off by joint Syracusan and allied troops. With no route home, the surviving Athenians surrendered. Almost the entire expedition force, tens of thousands of men lost, leaving Athens militarily crippled. The aftermath was devastating. The Athenian navy had been gutted, their best generals killed or disgraced, and thousands of soldiers, many of them citizen hoplites and rowers, were dead or enslaved in Sicily's quarries. The financial cost was staggering, and the psychological blow even worse. But the war was not yet over. In the years that followed, Athens tried to rebuild. Sparta, with unlikely help from the Persians, built a fleet to finally challenge Athenian supremacy at sea. In 405 BCE, the Spartan fleet under King Lysander engaged with the Athenian triremes at the decisive Battle of Aigos Potami. Nearly all of Athens's remaining ships were either sunk or captured in the battle. Only a handful escaped under cover of darkness. With their fleet destroyed, Athens lost control of its grain routes from the Black Sea and became entirely dependent on what little stored food remained within the city walls. Sparta wasted no time in forcing a naval blockade, cutting off all sea-based supply lines. By the spring of 404 BCE, famine had taken hold. Facing starvation, internal dissent, and no realistic hope of relief, Athens finally surrendered. The terms forced upon them were harsh. The long walls were torn down, the Athenian triremes were handed over, and the city's empire was dissolved, marking the close of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War had lasted nearly 3 decades. Tens of thousands were dead. Cities lay in ruins. Any semblance of unity the Greeks had once found in the face of Persia was gone. In the decades after Sparta's victory, alliances fractured and loyalties shifted like sand. Athens, Corinth, and Thebes briefly joined forces against Spartan dominance following their victory. In 371 BCE, at Leuctra, Thebes shattered Sparta's grip on Greek lands. But Thebes couldn't hold the mantle either. Just 9 years later, at Mantinea, a coalition that surprisingly included both Sparta and Athens battled Thebes, each side hoping to fill the power vacuum. By the end of that conflict, no single city-state stood supreme. The old polis rivalries had drained resources and morale. But from the north, in a land many Greeks had once dismissed as backward and barbaric, came a new force. Philip of Macedon. A brilliant strategist and ruthless reformer, Philip transformed the Kingdom of Macedonia into a military powerhouse and used diplomacy and war to bring most of Greece under his control. But just as Philip stood on the edge of unifying the Greek world, he was assassinated. The throne passed to his 20-year-old son, a student of Aristotle, raised in war and ready to shape the world. His name was Alexander. The year is 356 BCE. We find ourselves in a much different world than where we began our journey. The Persian Empire still reigned supreme, a century after its war with the Greek city-states, its territory stretching from the Aegean to the Indus. To the east, the Indian subcontinent teemed with powerful kingdoms and philosophical movements, including early Buddhism taking root in the Ganges Valley. In China, the Warring States period raged, regional powers vying for control before the birth of a unified empire. In Italy, Rome was still a republic on the rise, growing in strength, but far from ruling the Mediterranean. And in the Greek world, power was shifting once again. Alexander the Great was born in the Macedonian capital of Pella. Though Macedonians spoke a Greek dialect and worshipped the same gods, many southern Greeks refused to accept them as one of their own. Macedon nonetheless traced its lineage to Greek heroes, forging an identity that was indeed Greek, but unique to the region. From the very beginning, Alexander was raised to believe he was destined for greatness. His mother told him he descended from Achilles. His father ensured he was trained in the arts of war, riding, swordsmanship, tactics, and endurance. And for his education, Philip chose the greatest mind of the age, Aristotle. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied philosophy, science, medicine, poetry, and ethics. At just 18, Alexander led a cavalry at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where he and his father, Philip II, crushed a coalition of Greek city-states led by Athens and Thebes. In the aftermath, Philip convened the Hellenic League, often called the League of Corinth, unifying most of Greece under singular leadership for the first time in history. Yet behind the triumph, tensions simmered in the royal household. Philip's marriage to Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian noblewoman, threatened Alexander's position. Cleopatra had given birth to a son, potentially displacing Alexander. Rumors circulated that Philip intended to favor the new heir. The split in the court deepened, and Alexander clashed openly with Philip's supporters, especially Attalus, Cleopatra's powerful uncle. Then, in 336 BCE, the king was assassinated by Pausanias, a disgruntled royal page. As the palace plunged into chaos, Alexander and Olympias moved quickly. Olympias eliminated rival claimants, while Alexander secured loyalty from the army and declared himself king. At just 20 years old, he acted decisively, executing potential rivals and winning oaths from Macedonian garrisons. When Thebes revolted, Alexander responded by destroying the city and enslaving its people, sending a clear message to the rest of Greece. In a matter of weeks, the heir had become undisputed ruler. He inherited a unified league, a battle-hardened army, and a throne he secured with speed and force. Where many expected disorder, Alexander showed he had no intention of ruling in his father's shadow. Alexander also launched a campaign north of Macedonia into the Balkans, where he moved swiftly to suppress uprisings and secure his northern borders. He defeated the Thracians, crossed the Danube River to intimidate northern tribes, and pushed westward to subdue the Illyrians, who had threatened Macedonian territory. These rapid victories reasserted Macedonian control and ensured that the region would not erupt in rebellion, while Alexander turned his focus east toward his next target, the Persians. He then gathered his army and began a campaign that would redraw the map of the world. Now, in 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia with an army of roughly 40,000 men. It was a bold move. He was a young king marching into the heart of the largest empire on earth, ruled by Darius III. At the Battle of the Granicus River, Alexander faced his first major test against them. A coalition of Persian satraps assembled their forces along the riverbank in Asia Minor, hoping to halt the Macedonian advance early. Despite the dangerous terrain, charging uphill across a fast-moving river, Alexander led a bold cavalry assault straight into the Persian lines. After intense fighting, the Macedonians broke through, killing many Persian commanders and routing the enemy. The victory opened the gateway into Asia Minor and sent a clear message. Alexander had arrived, and he would not be easily stopped. City after city fell, some resisting, others welcoming him as a liberator. But Alexander wasn't just a conqueror. He was a master of symbolism and strategy. He spared captured Persian elites, wore local dress when needed, and honored the gods of the peoples he conquered. In 333 BCE, Alexander faced Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus in southern Anatolia. The Persian army outnumbered him, possibly 2-1. But Alexander exploited the narrow terrain of the battlefield, which neutralized the Persian numerical advantage. Leading a direct charge at the Persians with his elite companion cavalry, Alexander broke through the lines and forced Darius to flee, abandoning his family and treasury. The victory was decisive, morale shattered in the Persian ranks, and Alexander was now seen not just as a general, but as a legitimate challenger to the Persian throne. Then he turned south toward the Mediterranean coast. Tyre, a fortified island city half a mile off the coast, refused to surrender. With no way to attack by sea, Alexander had few options. He could turn back and seek easier victories elsewhere, or continue pursuing diplomacy. Instead, he chose something bolder. He decided to turn the island of Tyre into part of the mainland. Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway, stretching from the shore across the shallow waters to the island's fortified walls. Stone by stone, his men built it, using rubble, timber, and earth to push the land forward. At first, the Tyrians reportedly mocked the effort, but day by day, the land bridge crept closer. What seemed impossible was now inevitable. Tyrians fought back with fire and raids, but Alexander reinforced the mole with siege towers and naval support from newly conquered ports. Over the course of months, the causeway reached the island. Macedonian forces launched a coordinated assault by land and sea, thanks to Allied assistance, finally breaching the walls. Tyre fell in a brutal sack. Its population was largely killed or enslaved, and the city left shattered. The causeway permanently connected the island to the mainland, reshaping the coastline to this day. He marched into Egypt next, where he was welcomed as a liberator. There he founded the city of Alexandria, which would grow into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. He even visited the oracle at Siwa Oasis, where he was told he was the son of Zeus Ammon, a moment that only fueled his growing sense of destiny. But the heart of Persia still waited. By 331 BCE, Alexander had carved a path through Asia Minor, the Levant, and Egypt, claiming vast swathes of Persian territory in just a few years. His empire now stretched from the Aegean Sea to the edge of Mesopotamia. He was thousands of miles from Macedonia, deep in the heart of the Persian world. But he wasn't retreating. He was pressing forward. For Darius III, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Alexander had already taken some of the richest provinces of the empire, and a defeat now could mean the collapse of Persian rule entirely. On the open plains of Gaugamela, Alexander faced Darius III for the final time. The Persian king assembled a massive multi-ethnic force, possibly over 100,000 troops, with chariots and cavalry from across the empire. The battlefield was carefully chosen and cleared to give Persian forces the space to maneuver. Alexander's army was outnumbered, but far better trained and coordinated. At dawn, Alexander advanced with calculated precision. He extended his right flank, drawing the Persian cavalry away from the center in an attempt to thin the enemy line. Darius, expecting to envelop the Macedonians, took the bait. Then came the strike. Spotting a gap in the weakened Persian center, Alexander led a wedge formation of the companion cavalry, cutting deep into enemy lines with brutal speed. He drove straight toward Darius, aiming to end the war with a single charge. As Macedonian steel smashed through the Persian ranks, chaos erupted. Darius, seeing his lines faltering and fearing encirclement, fled the battlefield in his chariot, just as he had at Issus. His army unraveled. With their king gone, Persian morale collapsed. The Macedonians pursued the fleeing troops, cutting down thousands. The battle was more than a tactical victory. It was the decisive blow that shattered organized Persian resistance. Alexander now controlled the heart of the empire, its roads, cities, and treasuries. Darius's authority was broken. Alexander marched to Babylon, then to the great Persian capitals of Susa and finally Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. There, amidst its wealth and splendor, he burned the palace of Xerxes to the ground. Whether it was an act of revenge or perhaps a political message, it symbolized the end of Achaemenid Persia. But Alexander didn't stop. He pursued Darius into the eastern provinces, through the deserts and mountains of modern-day Iran and Central Asia. When Darius was murdered by one of his own men, Alexander took it personally. He hunted the assassin down, killed him, and gave Darius a royal burial. He was no longer just avenging Greece. He now claimed to be the rightful king of Asia. In the next phase of his campaign, Alexander pushed even further east. He fought brutal guerrilla wars in Bactria, married the local princess Roxana, and founded more cities to secure his rule. By 327 BCE, he had set his sights on India. Crossing the Hindu Kush, he descended into the Indus Valley and faced King Porus and his war elephants at the Battle of Hydaspes. Alexander, in rough and unfamiliar territory, would cross a monsoon-swollen Hydaspes River during a thunderstorm to engage. In the heat of the battle, Indian war elephants inflicted significant damage. They broke through the Macedonian phalanx lines, trampling soldiers in their path. Mounted with platforms carrying archers and javelin throwers, the elephants delivered attacks from an elevated position. Their tusks, often reinforced with metal, could gore and impale anyone who stood in their way. The Macedonians would win, but at a high price. Impressed by Porus's bravery during the battle, Alexander allowed him to retain his kingdom, now as a vassal. But here, at the edge of the known world, his army finally broke. Worn down by nearly 8 years of campaigning, heavy monsoons, and an alien landscape, his men refused to march further east. They had marched over 10,000 miles, from the plains of Macedonia to the edges of the known world, fighting in deserts, mountains, and jungles. The climate of India was unlike anything they had experienced. Sweltering heat, dense forests, and seasonal downpours that turned roads to mud. Their supplies were stretched thin. Disease and fatigue ran rampant. When they reached the banks of the Hephasis River in 326 BCE, and learned that even greater kingdoms lay beyond, like the powerful Nanda Empire with vast armies and war elephants, the men had reached their limit. Alexander tried to rally them, invoking glory, destiny, and the uncharted world beyond. But his words fell flat. His veteran officers, many of whom had been with him since the beginning, objected. Days passed in silence as Alexander remained in his tent, refusing to speak, hoping they would change their minds. But the army stood firm, and Alexander, reluctantly, agreed to turn back. The journey home was punishing. He led his army through the Gedrosian desert, where thousands died of thirst and heat. It was a brutal march, and a rare miscalculation. Eventually, Alexander returned to Babylon, now the capital of his empire. Undefeated in battle, the world stood at his feet. He began planning new conquests, new cities, and even a possible invasion of Arabia. But then, suddenly, he fell ill. Fever, pain, weakness. Over the course of days, his condition worsened. Over the centuries, historians and physicians have debated what caused his death. Some ancient sources blamed poisoning, though most modern scholars find that unlikely, since his symptoms developed gradually over several days. Others suggest malaria, typhoid fever, or even autoimmune disorders. Some point to an old war wound, or exhaustion from years of relentless campaigning. In the end, no one knows for sure. What is certain is that his condition steadily worsened. He lost his ability to speak. His generals waited outside his chamber in silence. And in a haze of sickness and silence, Alexander the Great died. He was just 32 years old. Alexander's legacy remains complex. He is remembered as a visionary, a military genius who united vast lands and spread Greek culture farther than anyone before him. To many, he represents courage, ambition, and leadership on an unmatched scale. But others see a darker side. A ruthless conqueror who destroyed cities, executed rivals, and pushed his men past the breaking point. His pursuit of glory came at a heavy cost, and his lack of a succession plan created heavy conflict and ended his empire immediately. But while his political legacy fractured, his cultural legacy had only just begun. Alexander's conquests created more than an empire. They sparked the Hellenistic world, an era where Greek language, art, architecture, religion, and ideas blended with the cultures of Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and India. Dozens of cities he founded became hubs of Greek life far from the Greek mainland. In Egypt, Alexandria flourished into a center of science, philosophy, and learning. Its library would become among the most famous in the ancient world. Hellenistic scientists like Archimedes and Euclid made groundbreaking advances, measuring the Earth's circumference, developing early physics, and laying the foundations of geometry still taught today. Monumental constructions like the Colossus of Rhodes and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, both counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood as symbols of Hellenistic ambition, though they are now lost to time. In Bactria and beyond, Greek-style coins, statues, and temples stood next to Zoroastrian altars and Buddhist stupas. Even in northern India, Greco-Buddhist art emerged, a fusion of East and West, where Greek artistic techniques were used to sculpt the first images of the Buddha. The Greek language became the international tongue of diplomacy, commerce, and culture, from Egypt to the edge of India. It was the language of scholars, rulers, and sacred texts, including, centuries later, parts of the New Testament. Back in Greece, many of the city-states began to organize into regional alliances. The Achaean League, centered in the Peloponnese, included cities like Corinth and Argos. To the north and west, the Aetolian League emerged, often aligning with Athens and Sparta. These leagues weren't just defensive pacts. They were the last coordinated efforts of the Greek world to retain independence. But as rivalries deepened, the Greeks increasingly turned to a rising power in the West: Rome. Rome first arrived as an ally, intervening in the Macedonian Wars under the banner of Greek liberty. But soon it became clear that liberation was turning into domination. By 146 BCE, after a revolt by the Achaean League, Rome responded with devastating force. Corinth, one of Greece's great cultural and economic centers, was sacked, its treasures looted, and its population enslaved. That same year, the Roman general Mummius dissolved the league and brought mainland Greece under Roman control. Politically, Greece had fallen, but culturally, it endured. And in many ways, it conquered its conquerors. Greek language, art, philosophy, and science flooded into Rome. Educated Romans studied Homer, debated in the style of Socrates, and adorned their homes with Greek sculptures. Stoicism, originally a Hellenistic philosophy, became a guiding worldview for Roman statesmen. Even Rome's own republican institutions bore echoes of the Athenian experiment. While the Roman Republic was distinct in structure, the idea that citizens had a voice in governance, through assemblies, debates, and magistrates, reflected a parallel belief that citizens could shape the path of their state. In a way, Rome unknowingly picked up a mantle Athens had once carried. Centuries later, the political experiments of both would be rediscovered, their ideas reborn in new forms, directly inspiring the structures of modern republics and democracies around the world. But the roots of this world stretched back to far earlier times. In the tales sung by bards about Achilles and Odysseus, in the city-states of Athens and Sparta, each one unique, yet bound by language, gods, and pride. It grew in the agora, where citizens debated and philosophers questioned. In the temples to Apollo, Athena, and Zeus, where myth met meaning. And in the Olympic Games, where rivals became kin, if only for a moment. Even as their cities fell and their empires faded, their legacy endured. Across mountains, seas, and centuries, the story of ancient Greece lives on. We walk through buildings inspired by their columns, and we speak in languages filled with their words. But for all their contributions, the Greeks were not myths or marble statues. They were human, flawed, passionate, curious, divided. And though their time has passed, their story is far from over, because the world they helped imagine is the one we still inhabit.